So that is a background. So in this presentation, I will go to the substance now. In this, in the revision of trade union law in 2021, December 24, for my sharing, I will go through some of this. Next slide, please. Some of this in this way. I just try to look at some basic structure and content of the trade union law, and then look into the revision in terms of background, why this revision took place, and what are some of the processes that was involved in completing the revision, and then look at some of the key points of revision. And then I will try to, after that, at the end, I'll try to make some discussion or observation of what would be the significant implication and application of the revision. Next slide, please. Next. Yeah. So I have prepared about 10 slides on the basic structure and content of the trade union law in China, but I will not go through all of them. I think after this seminar, Dr. Chi will be able to share with you the PPT. So if you can have a look at that by yourself. For my sharing, not speak too much on actual content, overall content of the trade union law. The trade union law is composed of 8 chapters with in total 57 articles. And next slide, please. And in chapter 1, in the general provision, it sets out what is the purpose of the law. The purpose is to stipulate the status and rights and obligation of trade unions in the party-state system in China. So from the very beginning, when you look at, if you have any knowledge and information about the way the trade union law, what trade union law looks like in other countries, is slightly different in the way it goes about stipulating the trade union law. In other countries, trade union law starts with what is by stating that it is the right of the workers to form trade unions, things like that. But in China, the law starts by saying that it is to stipulate the status of the trade union within the party-state system. And then in the chapter 1, it contains some provisions on the scope or definition of workers who have the right to organize or join trade unions, and also sets out some of the basic roles and function of trade union. And in this basic duty, role, and function of trade union, we see that this provides some details regarding what is the status of trade union in China, and what is the expected role of the trade union within the context of the party-state system. Let's go all the way down to slide 10. Slide 10 is the beginning of my observation and discussion regarding the current the revision that took place recently. So the trade union law, first trade union law in China was adopted in 1950. And that was a time before China began the reform and opening, just like Doi Moi in Vietnam. So that the trade union law in 1950 was very much a law that describes trade union as within the communist or planned economy. And but the modern trade union law was adopted in 1992. That begins to provide some provisions about trade unions within the context of socialist market economy. And it was revised twice before the recent one, revised in 2001 and 2009. And I think there was much more significant, I haven't looked at very carefully, but there was much more significant revision in 2001. And then there were some minor revisions in 2009. And from the various materials, newspaper articles, and briefings and reports about the current trade union law revision, we understand that the work or the idea of the revising the trade union law and the work on revising or developing the revision for the revision started in early 2019. And the actual work of preparing the draft for the revision was carried out by the ACFTU, All China Federation of Trade Unions, which is Chinese equivalent of the VGCL in Vietnam, and in cooperation with the Legislative Affairs Committee of the Standing Committee of National People's Congress. I'm not so sure whether you know about the way the National People's Congress works in China. It is a similar body as the National Assembly in Vietnam, but whereas National Assembly meets quite a large number of days, many number of days. It has 2 sessions in Vietnam in spring and autumn, and each session has at least 1 or 2 months. So altogether within the year, the National Assembly looks at the laws and monitoring the work of the government over quite many days, a few months. But in China, the National People's Congress itself, the body, meets only for about a week in the year, in the spring, in March. So it's coming up in the next couple of months. But most of the work of the lawmaking and revising the laws is done by the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. And Standing Committee is able to have a session by having a quorum of about more than 150 people. So if it has at least 150 people taking part in the meeting, the Standing Committee has a valid meeting. And many of the laws and revision of laws is undertaken by the Standing Committee rather than the National People's Congress in itself. And first public announcement of the revision, the plan to revise labor law, trade union law, was made in November 2021. And he said that the meeting of chairpersons of the Standing Committee. So it seems that there are a number of different subcommittees or committees within the Standing Committee, and this small secretariat type leadership committee of the National People's Congress decides on the agenda of the laws to be worked on by the standing committee. And this chairperson's meeting in November decided to put on the agenda of the 32nd session of the Standing Committee, being held from 20 to 24 December 2021, to deliberate and work on the revision of the trade union law. And within the agenda, there were about more than 10 different laws, I think, that were being discussed, either making new law or revising existing laws, more than 10 of those items. And the revision of the trade union law was just one item within that agenda. So the first public announcement that there will be revision of the trade union law was made in November 2021. Although the work was carried out from early 2019, there was not much public activity regarding the development of the revision of the trade union law, preparing the, I'm sure there were a lot of work being done, but none of that was public activity. It was all within the small working groups and things like that. And so the first public knowledge information regard that the trade union law is to be revised was made in November 2021, and the actual work of revising and doing the lawmaking work was done over 4 days or is it 5 days in December, from December 20 to 24. So it did not take much time of the proper meeting of the standing committee to actually decide and adopt revision. So next slide, please. And in doing the revision, the National People's Congress Standing Committee, different secretariat made some briefing, held some press conference and briefings about the work of revising the law, and issued some brief background information about the revision of trade union law. And it set out some of the key principles, considerations, and content of the revision. And the thing that I'm sharing with you now comes directly from those information. It's not something that comes from my head, but it's basically quotations from that information that was released by the National People's Congress Standing Committee Secretariat. So the principle or the background for the revision is that it is necessary to revise the trade union law to implement the decision and arrangement of the party central committee and spirit of General Secretary Xi Jinping's important instructions, and promptly raise the effective experience and practices into legal provisions. So the key motivating factor for revising the law was to put into law, change law in such a way that it reflects the central message being delivered by the Secretary General of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping. And another thing that it's interesting is that on the last bullet point, the one principle for revising the law, trade union law, is that we will only make the changes if it is really necessary. And we do not make change if it can stay changed, it can change or stay unchanged. If so, absolutely necessary ones will be changed, but if something which people think it would be a good idea to change, but if it's not absolutely necessary to change, that it will not change. And I was wondering what it means. What are the things that people may have thought would be good to change, to revise, but they felt that it was not absolutely necessary to change. I was wondering what that kind of things could be, but I have some ideas. I'll talk about that a bit later. Next slide. Next slide, please. And as I said, this revision process and also the announcements about the revision talks about the meaning of the trade union law. So trade union law is a law that clarifies legal status and work responsibilities of trade unions. Responsibility is given to the trade union. Responsibility in the way that is described in this information, a responsibility of the trade union is given to the trade union by an external authority, and that authority is party state. And that's why, so it's clearly set out. It's very clearly set out. And at the same time, the law will provide important institutional guarantees for the trade union organization to be established and to carry out its work. And some of the things, so that's main motivation for the change. And then it has a number of few other elements that is motivation for change, and that is to somehow help the trade union to respond to change the situation, to be able to respond to help the trade union to respond effectively to change the situation, and also to bring about some consistency with other laws. We'll look into that later on in this discussion. So in total, there were 11 areas where there were revision in the trade union law. 11 major areas. I will not look into all of them, but I will try to look into some of the main ones. Yeah, you are fast. You know where I'm going. And the first one, based on that background information and background explanation about revision, that it is necessitated by the teachings or the leadership role of the Communist Party and General Secretary Xi Jinping, and that is reflected in one of the revisions. In Article 2, it revises existing Article 2 by adding that trade union exists and operates under the leadership of the Communist Party of China, and that trade union is a bridge and link between Communist Party of the China and masses workers. So it's a very much Leninist understanding of what trade union is. It's a conveyor belt. It's a belt that links between the party and the workers, masses working class. And that idea, although that idea has existed a long time, that idea is made into a text and inserted into the trade union law. And we may want to think about why they are doing that, because everyone knows that, but suddenly they felt it's necessary to put it in. As I said before, they will only revise if it is felt to be absolutely necessary. Why did they feel that it is absolutely necessary to make the change? These are the points that it should be good to think about and reflect and possibly to discuss. And then article. And then there's another important revision. This is another absolutely necessary revision, and based on the explanation, and it has also reflects reflects the change in the environment, which makes this change necessary. And the one in Article 3, there are two changes that took place. One is to change the description of worker. In the original 2000, in the before revision, workers were identified as workers who are doing physical or mental work, body work, physical work, or brain work, mental work. So white collar or intellectual work, or the manual of production work. So it was at that time, in early days of defining worker, this may have been important. But then with the change in the changes, it was felt that that kind of distinction or categories are not so important. So they removed this physical or mental work from the text and just went with worker. And in addition to this change, the revision added a new paragraph in Article 3, and it reads, trade union adapt to the development and changes in the organizational form of enterprises, the structure of the workforce, labor relations, employment forms, etc., and safeguard the rights of workers to join and organize trade unions in accordance with the law. What this means is that until this time, workers were felt to be, in general, and workers were that enjoyed the right to join trade union or organize trade unions. These workers were felt to be very clearly defined workers in an enterprise based on labor contract, company, worker. So there was, and this idea of company, idea of worker seemed to be very clear. But then this addition, new paragraph, reflects the change in the actual practices and realities in the economy, in the world of work, where we are now seeing workers and companies having different shapes and different forms. Platform economy, the gig economy, where there are work situations where employment relationship or labor relationship is not very clear. So instead of going into defining who the worker is, it says that workers may be found in many different ways. They are all workers, and union has to adapt its way of working in order to ensure that these workers also can join the trade union. So by having this change, it makes it legal and provides legal protection and legal right, and also the possibility for the trade union to organize workers who are takeaway food delivery bike riders, or Uber or Grab drivers, or express parcel delivery. All those workers who are found in new forms of employment, in the non-standard forms of employment, in the so-called platform economy, or in other forms of informal or very ambiguous relationships. So this is very, very important, and it's something that was felt to be necessary, and in order to give ability to the trade union to work with this kind of workers. Next slide, please. And then Article 4, it includes, Article 4 is the guiding principle. It sets out the guiding principles for the operation of the trade union in China, that it works under Constitution, it is under the leadership of Communist Party, and the guidance of Marxism, Leninism, thoughts of teachings of Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping. And then this was what it existed before revision, and after the revision, we see that the thoughts on socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new era of Secretary General Xi Jinping is inserted. So this, for in the context of China, where every legal document or every government policy papers have to indicate clearly that this is rooted, has roots in the thoughts, the principles of the party. It's necessary. So this was necessary to insert. Next slide, please. Article 6. Article 6 is interesting revision. Basically, it does not change very much, but it has two elements. It's highlighted in yellow. It says role of the duty of trade union. So protect workers, safeguard, represent, all those things that you usually find about in terms of when you describe the role and function of trade union. And in this, it says the revision is just as those words that are highlighted in the slide. And one is serving the masses of workers wholeheartedly, not just serve, not serve logically, not serve reasonably, but serve wholeheartedly with all your heart. And then the second change is to develop, the trade unions are required to develop very extensive contacts with workers. I mean, members, they are members, they're workers, but in addition to that kind of thing, but they want, the law says trade unions have duty to develop extensive contacts, relations with workers. I mean, is this reflection that they did not do that before? Or is this something they need to do now for some other reason? So for new reason. So it's this kind of change, although it's only a few words, it does give you, it makes you think, it makes you start thinking, why do the people think that it is necessary to do it? Especially in the context of this principle that you only change if it's absolutely necessary. I mean, that is guiding principle, orientation for making this revision. So in this context, what was felt to be, why is it absolutely necessary to insert these words? Serve the workers wholeheartedly, develop extensive contacts with workers. But it's there, it's there. I mean, I can start thinking about it and reflect about it, but I have no idea. I cannot go inside. There was not much discussion about this, and I cannot go inside the heads of the people who made this change, but just to highlight that this is very interesting change. Next slide, please. And another very interesting change or revision is insertion of a new paragraph in Article 8. Article 8 is about trade union is a kind of a trade union works to mobilize workers to be to serve the development and construction of the country, to serve the construction of building of the socialist system, to educate workers to be good people, to be the leaders of society, to be the working class and things like that. That's Article 8. In addition, and the revision, the revision adds a new paragraph talking about industrial workers. So it says, trade unions promote the reform of the construction of industrial worker contingent, improve the overall quality of the industrial worker, and give role to as backbone role of the industrial worker, things like that. And this industrial worker, the terminology, the words industrial worker is new. I come back to that. I'll give you some time to think about why they thought this is important to add industrial worker. But this is a point of observation or discussion that I'll come back to a bit later. With this, next slide, please. With this slide, I finish my observations or the sharing about what was revised. As I said, there were altogether 11 revisions, and this last slide refers to some of the remaining revisions. One important revision that was made was to expand and clarify the scope of employer. Before, the employer was the enterprises or public institutions, but they added social organizations which operate under in an enterprise management. So it's, if there is any kind of, let's say, profit motivation or labor relations as a basis of having workers everywhere, even if it's public organization or government organization in the ministry or other places, any place where there is a feature of labor relationship, then these organizations will be seen as employer. and will be where also the trade unions can be organized. Another change was to add that trade unions can provide legal aid. This is one area, one provision which comes under the orientation of having consistency with other laws. There is another law on legal aid, and so the trade unions are identified as an organization that can provide legal aid, not just legal advice to people, workers, but legal aid, meaning that they can represent them in the courts and other things, and they can work as, let's say, lawyers or something. Yeah, so sometimes that kind of legal, not legal, just legal counseling, legal advice, but actual preparation of litigation, going to courts and things like that, that comes under the scope of legal aid that's added to the role or the activity of trade union. And then the last change is that they've in the trade union law, there is a lot about collective bargaining, consultation, democratic management, democratic regulation of workplaces. And here they add that the trade union must be consulted by employer if employer is talking about changing the working hours or rest periods or issues related to protection of women workers. So on these kind of issues, trade union must be consulted. So expands the obligation of employer in terms of consulting workers and trade unions. So this is the end of introduction or just information regarding what was revised. So I mentioned that I will do in these slides. Next slide, please. I will look at the basic structure. Let's clip. I have done that. I looked at, although I did not look at basic structure and content of trade union law in details, but they are in the slides. So if you want to, you can have a look at them, and I can also share. And then I try to look at the revision, going in terms of background, in terms of key points, and now it's time to talk, to have some discussion or observations about significant implications and application of the revised. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, one of the key points of the revision of the trade union law in 2021 coming into effect from January 1 this year is the concept of worker. And as I mentioned before, the change reflects the change in reality where workers are found working in different forms of employment, different in the platform economy and things like that. So, and the trade union law does not say anything about whether these workers are employees, whether they have employment relationship or not. They just say they are workers who work in different arrangements. And as long as they're workers, they can join trade union. And so key definitional component for this to define worker is used in the trade union law, and that is that worker is a person whose main source of livelihood is wage income. So it's not, so wage income is something that is money that is given by someone else in return for some work being done for that person. So it creates a very broad definition of worker. And in that regard, it's quite different from definition of worker that we can find in the labor law in China. In China, labor law, Article 2 says, worker is someone who forms labor relationship with employer. And what is that labor relationship, employment relationship? Basically, labor relationship is formed or exists, comes to exist if there is a labor contract or contract of employment contract between a person and another person, person A and person B. So in terms of labor law and applying the protections provided in the labor law to someone, you have to be a worker who has labor relationship. But in trade union law, someone who can join trade union, who can organize trade union, who can benefit from the activities and services of trade unions in China, you don't need to prove that you are employee or you are a worker as in labor law. As long as you are you earn a living through by receiving money from someone who gives that money for your work, you are a worker. So this gives trade union law a much broader scope in terms of targeting workers, people to organize. And in this regard, this is interesting, especially if you want to compare with Vietnam. In Vietnam, trade union law and judicial charter distinguish between worker, employee, and workers who do not have employment relationship, who are self-employed or things like that. And the Vietnam trade union law and the judicial charter creates a distinction among groups of workers. And then while making that distinction, it makes possible to have two different types of organization of workers. One is gongduan, another is syndicate. So gongduan, trade union, is available for workers who have employment relationship. But workers who are in self-employment or workers who are not in employment relationship, they do not become part of trade union, gongduan, but they are organized into syndicates. So VGCL allows for organizing two different types of organization, whereas in China, by having very broad definition and scope of worker under the trade union law, it's possible for every worker, all the workers, to become part of the trade union under the trade union's the form of organization. That's very interesting. And so, and we see, next slide, please. But this practice that we find in China is not something unique to China. Many other countries have different kind of different scope of definition of worker to be who will benefit from the law, different laws. In Korea is one. In South Korea, Labor Standard Act defines the worker who will benefit from the protection of the Labor Standard Act as worker who is employee of an employer. Employee has to be an employee, meaning it has to have labor contract, labor relationship. But in Korea, at the same time, the trade union law in South Korea says worker who enjoys the protection and rights provided by trade union law is a worker who lives on wages or salary or any other equivalent form of income earned through working, through doing job. So it's in that sense, in the way that's structured in Korea, it's quite similar to the way it's set out in China. In some other countries, the definition of worker differs according to the purpose of law. For example, in the US, when they have law on OSH, occupational safety and health. So the safety and health at work, employer has to protect and guarantee the safety and health of workers. But this employer responsibility is not just to the employees, but any worker, whether that worker has employment relationship with that employer or not, any worker that works in an area that the employer has certain control, has received that protection. So it's not employment relationship that provides the rights and protection for safety and health. So it's different definition, and also people who can join employment injury insurance and things like that. By having different definition of worker, it allows a wider range of workers to benefit from those protection. Next slide, please. No. Go back. And this, I come back to Article 3. I mentioned Article 3 was a very important change that allows trade union to organize the workers in different forms of employment. But the text of that revision is very interesting. It says trade unions should adopt to the changes, so that they can organize workers in different forms. It does not say these workers are found in different forms of employment to be workers who have right to join. It does not take that road of trying to define these people as workers. Thus, it takes the way of trade union has to organize them anyway, without asking the question whether they are employees or not, or worker or not, things like that. So so it avoids the question of expanding of definition of worker in some ways, but creates the obligation and the possibility for trade union to be able to organize these new groups of people, new groups of workers. And that's a very interesting way. And this is something that also can find in some other countries, especially with regards to organizing workers in the platform economy. In Korea and many other countries, especially Korea, they make use of that difference of definition of worker in the Labor Standard Act and the trade union law to organize the gig workers. And based on that, they carry out collective bargaining. So sometimes you say that, oh, if you're not an employee, you cannot form a union, you cannot have collective bargaining. But because worker is the worker who enjoys the right to organize trade union, right to exercise collective bargaining, that worker is defined differently. Even if you don't have to worry about whether this worker is employment relationship, without worrying about that, you can begin to have trade union and collective bargaining. And that we find in Korea and many other countries. So in that regard, Chinese approach it's not that strange. It's still something that can be found with a lot of similarities with different experiences. Next slide, please. And this kind of revision, this kind of flexibility is already, Chinese already have this kind of experience of innovation, of flexibility. And that's found in revision of trade union law in 2021. Until 2021, it said a basic trade union or 공단cơ sở, if you're talking about in Vietnam, would be in China would be organized if you have at least 25 members. That was the provision in the trade union law before 2001 revision. But in the 2001 revision, it says that if membership in one enterprise is less than 25, so if enterprise is small, then a trade union can be organized with workers in not just one, but in a number of enterprises. So you can have multi-enterprise trade union. So it allows for trade unions to be organized not just in one enterprise, but in a one organization that has members from many companies, many enterprises. And that is a very important innovation in 2001 that helped trade unions in China to be able to organize smaller companies, workers in smaller companies. And that has been very, very, in many ways, very effective. Another change in 2021 was, until that time, trade unions in China had the system. The trade union system had a structure of national level headquarters like VGCL, and then province level organization like FOL, Federation, and then city level or district level federation, just like VGCL at district level. But when you begin to have a district that is large, and there are some geographical areas within district where there is some concentration of workers, which would be a good idea to have some kind of organization that can provide concentrated service or work and activity with this kind of group. So they felt the need. So they allowed to have association of trade unions in lower level, at, let's say, if you talk about, let's say, it's something, a smaller geographical or administrative unit that is smaller than district in Vietnam. Even at that level, it'll be possible to form a coalition or association of grassroots trade unions. So this helped, this revision in 2001 helped trade unions to become closer to the workers. Because it is at the many of these resources and personnel of trade union at upper level exists in the federations and FOLs and district level. And having this association at the lower level helped the trade unions in China to allocate resources to a lower level. And in that way, it's quite similar. You could say it's quite similar to the IZ unions in Vietnam. But when you look at IZ unions in Vietnam, in different provinces, IZ union covers all the different IZs in one province, mostly. So if there are, let's say, 20 IZs in let's say, in Ho Chi Minh City, there will be, I'm not so sure. Ho Chi Minh City was a bit different. Anyway, so if there's a Haiphong, if there is a, let's say 10 IZs in one city, one province, there will be one IZ union covering all the 10 IZs. But with the kind of innovation that the Chinese have undertaken in 2001, it could be possible to have one IZ union for each IZ. And this will give that organization a certain level of flexibility and resources and effort to concentrate their work, instead of having to having to go to all the different IZs, 10 different IZs in the province and to do the work. So that kind of change, this kind of innovations have taken place in China far easier than, far more responsively than in Vietnam. Next slide, please. So what some kind of possibilities of application of this change. Already I've indicated why these changes have taken place. In some ways, it reflects and it responds to the change in the situation, like the platform workers. And since the Chinese trade unions, ACFTU, since 2019, have made very strong public announcements and campaigns to organize unions among the platform workers and carrying out collective bargaining in the platform workers. And this is reflected as a background and motivation for the revision. So this will help the trade unions in China to become much more active in organizing the new groups of workers, new types of workers that are emerging. Next slide, please. So already, let's say, picture on the left is something there from a newspaper in January 20. It says, in Guangzhou, online delivery industry workers unions were organized, and they all now then formed federation. So this picture, and on picture right is October last year in Shenyang area in China, where express delivery workers in uniforms, like these people who are delivering food, like in Grab or in Baemin in Vietnam. These workers who are delivering takeaway food or parcels, they formed a union and they concluded a collective bargaining agreement. So that's the newest item. So we can see, if you have time to monitor the internet throughout China, you virtually can see the news items regarding organizing trade union or having collective bargaining agreement in these platform economy sectors, virtually at least one a week. So there is a very widespread, very extensive and concentrated effort on the part of the trade unions in China to actually organize and to carry out collective bargaining in the new forms in economy. So, next slide, please. I mentioned in the briefing about the change in the labor trade union law, the new article, new paragraph, new article 8, which talks about the industrial worker. And this insertion, a new paragraph, new article, reflects a very strong effort on the part of the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese system as a whole that started in July 2017. In July 2017, Chinese Communist Party Central Committee adopted a plan called Reform Plan for the Construction of Industrial Workers in the New Era. What it means is that it more or less says some kind of things. It identifies industrial worker as something that's very important for Chinese system, Chinese economy, Chinese system. And this, next slide, please. This, when you start thinking about what is industrial worker, you can think about, are these just workers in factories, in modern factory system, different from, let's say, traditional workers who craft skilled workers. But when you look at carefully, it reflects a concern that is generated by change in the way work is done, in the way production is carried out, where there's a lot of automation, a lot of digitalization, a lot of flexibility, so that you do not have the same image of worker as powerful, strong, that fits the idea of working class. So they wanted to somehow identify those workers and also it reflects the fact that manufacturing or industry, in terms of size, in terms of workforce, is changing. There is a lot more people working in service sector. So even in all other countries, they have definition over whether these are workers as can be defined in terms of working class or in terms of proletariat. So there's always discussion like that. And this, I think, is an extension of that kind of debate, but that reflects the change in the work organization, production process. And so it calls for that. It reflects a very serious concern about the change that is taking place. But in order to be effective to address this challenge, this problem, this concern, it's much more bigger problem. For example, in a society like Korea, China, and even Vietnam, in many countries, where every young person or every family, parents want their children to go to university, not to go to factory, not to go to vocational training school. When everything in Korea, about 90% of high school graduates go to university. And in China, it's increasing very fast, and also in Vietnam. When society thinks about going to university and the kind of things that you can gain from going to university is more important, then what does it mean to be a worker? Is there a big difference in status between those people who graduate from university, those people who do not go to university? And so and many people nowadays, young people, don't want to work in factories. In this kind of context, it's not just so if you want to really address the question and challenge that is expressed by this terminology, new concept, industrial worker, it really calls for demands to look at overall orientation of the society, overall system of society, things like that. And also at the same time, it calls for very careful look at how work is organized and in what kind of things you need, what kind of mechanisms you need at the workplace in order to ensure that some core workers remain core workers, and they can have a status that is a pride that is as good as a university graduate engineer. So this is it's a question and challenge that was introduced that's highlighted in the that can be seen in the revision that was undertaken this year. So, okay, that's the end of my presentation. I think, I don't know, did I spend too long? Yes, I think so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Youngmo. And I think that your presentation was not just informative, but also intriguing a lot of thoughts, I think from myself, and also I'm sure from my friends and colleagues here. I've taken so much notes and questions here. That's why I was very slow in controlling the slides. We still have 1 more hour for discussion. So I'm sure that everyone has their own questions and we all want to hear it answered by Youngmo. Before that, I just want to say that because we look at the Chinese experience from the angle of the Vietnamese experience, you know that in literature, since 2005, we have talked a lot about the divergence of trade union systems between China and Vietnam. And as you can see very clearly from Youngmo's presentation, this divergence is now clearly put into writing in the revision of the Chinese trade union law, especially about the role of the trade unions and responsibilities given by the party state, and also its role in not representing the workers' interests, but like a bridge between the party state and the masses of workers. There are a lot of interesting details, and also I think a lot of very valuable lessons that we can learn from the revision of the Chinese law, trade union law, for example, the inclusion of the platform workers who are considered informal workers, and enable them, giving them the right to join trade unions. How is that effective in protecting their interests, in promoting their rights? We are not sure, but at least that is something that the Chinese trade unions have done. So despite my many questions I really want to ask, I'd like to ask you all to raise your hand if you have any questions or comments to Mr. Youngmo Yoon. I can see from the chat box here a question from Lộc Nguyễn, đúng không ạ? Bạn Lộc Nguyễn. He said, "Dear Professor Youngmo, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I have 2 questions. The most important point in the revision is the legal aid instead of legal service that affects both employee and employer. If so, how can we solve the problem of the lack of labor contract or the labor relationship like street vendors?" So that is the first question from Mr. Lộc. Would you like to go for it, or you want to? Okay, we have 1 more question. Hands raised here by Trang. Mời Trang nhỉ? Trang nói luôn đi nhỉ? So we will round up like 3-4 questions, and then you go for it, right? Trang ơi, mời bạn nhỉ? Okay,
dạ em đặt câu hỏi tiếng Anh hay tiếng Việt, bằng tiếng Anh hay tiếng Việt nhỉ chị?
Tiếng Anh tiếng Việt đều được, có phiên dịch em ạ.
Dạ. Vâng, nhưng có cần anh Youngmo trả lời câu hỏi kia trước không em cứ hỏi luôn ạ.
Bây giờ chị sẽ collect khoảng 3 câu hỏi gì đó để cho anh trả lời.
Dạ vâng. Thì em có vài cái câu hỏi mà cũng muốn làm rõ thêm. Thì cái thứ nhất ở đây là em thấy ở trong cái